Hi guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of Let's Chat Ethics. I'm your co-host Ariana.
And I'm your other co-host Amanda.
So today, Amanda and I are excited to have another amazing guest joining us. So it seems to be that this month is jam-packed with incredible people sharing their unique area of expertise. So obviously it was incredible to have Alba and Ryan on to share their amazing insights into China and Chinese philosophy. And I've, had a lot of people saying that it was great to actually hear a different perspective and hear about things from the Chinese philosophical side rather than always hearing the Western perspective. So, that they were really, really great episodes for us. And we really enjoyed recording them and we loved having Alba and Ryan on. But today we actually have Mike Butcher MBE, who is the Editor-at-large of TechCrunch and co-founder of Pathfounder, the editorial events and report series on impact innovation. Mike has been named one of the most influential journalists in European technology by Wired and the Daily Telegraph. He co-founded the Europa Awards for European startups, the non-profits TechVets and Techfugees, the co-working network TechHub. He is a regular tech commentator on the BBC, Sky News, CNN, CNBC and Aljazeera, and has been a judge on the Apprentice UK. GQ magazine named him one of the 100 most connected men in the UK, and he's a Maserati 100 innovator. He has advised the UK government on tech startup policy and awarded an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours. So this episode was, really great to record because Mike was coming from the VC and startup expertise that he, writes about on a daily basis and works within. And it was great to kind of hear his expertise around growth and what ethics could actually mean in that space, and hearing it from, the business side and, hearing about whether ethics could actually be something that was ingrained in venture capitalists and in tech startups, or whether it's just solely about money and growth, which Amanda and I have kind of touched on before. But it's great to obviously have Mike here to share his knowledge in this area, and it's kind of unique since we haven't had anyone with this area of expertise join us yet. So we're really excited to share with you today's episode, and we hope you enjoy. Okay, well, hi, Mike. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you on. We're excited to have you here and to talk to you a bit more about your work and your experience at TechCrunch. I'm not sure if you wanted to give yourself like a small introduction. We're going to give you a bigger one afterwards. But yeah, if you want to tell us a bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Well, thank you very much for asking me on. It's a great honor. I'm a journalist with TechCrunch, and we cover technology startups and venture capital. Essentially what we cover is the money, the business side of high growth technology companies. And of course, we do of course cover the technologies themselves, but really we cover them as businesses rather than as, we don't get overly obsessed with the technologies as such, but more like the business. There's a famous phrase in the Watergate investigations by Washington Post when the Deep Throat, the famous source, followed by Woodward and Bernstein, said to them, "Follow the money," and that's kind of what we do at TechCrunch.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we wanted to talk to you actually a bit more about we were reading a recent article that you wrote about Ethics Grade and covering kind of their journey through ESG and kind of rating social media companies and tech companies. Have you, in your experience, found that there's kind of a more need for ethics in any of the VCs your startups you've been covering, or is this kind of a new trend that you saw with Ethics Grade?
Well, zooming out a bit, historically speaking, venture capitalists have not been hugely overly concerned with the idea of ethics behind algorithms. The idea is that startups employ AI for want of a better phrase, or machine learning, probably a bit more accurately, to grow a tech company much faster than you would if you were manually tweaking algorithms. And that's all very germane to the whole idea of a technology company reaching the hallowed quote 10x unquote valuation from the money that was put in. So the idea is that AI is really just part of the puzzle in creating this very, very high growth company that can go from, in the famous phrase, 0 to 1, or rather 0 to, trillions of percent bigger. And it needs AI to do that, because, human beings don't scale, but AI can. Yeah. So, and that's where it all comes in. Now, in terms of the ethics side of it, the famous phrase in tech is growth. Don't stop the growth, whatever you do. And of course, it does lead companies to make choices which perhaps are often devoid of moral angles, shall we say. The growth is all important. So that's where it all comes from. That's where it all goes to, really.
Mm-hmm. And to what extent do you think that this idea that growth is the only important thing? Do you think that maybe the problem of the lack of morals is going to hinder the growth at some point? Like, they talk about ethical debt, and whether companies are going to have to go back and fix that. Is that going to affect their valuation in any way, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's all very nice to ask to think that we would live in that world, but the reality is that up until recently, nobody frankly cared, I don't think, about ethics. It was all about, as I said before, about growth. Now, what you've seen with the rise of ESG, environmental social governance, as a movement, and also as particularly as a movement in the asset management space, is the idea that you need to pay attention to these things, like, how much CO2 you might be pumping out, etc., what impact you might be having on the environment, what impact you might be having on society, if you're extending, disparities and between classes, etc. And as treating it as a risk, as something to be taken into consideration when you're valuing a company. And this is the kind of language that these people speak. They don't speak about, whether or not it's a nice thing or not to, tweak the algorithm in favor of diversity or to make sure we're not pumping out as much CO2. What they're interested in is risk. So, and when you start saying that word, suddenly their ears prick up and they start to realize that perhaps might be more to this. And because, that's what they don't want. They want to reduce all that kind of a risk. So, for instance, to take example, a story I recently ran on TechCrunch about an agency in Bristol. I'll try and bring the name up at some point. And they've come up with an idea to look at AI in terms of risk for asset management managers, and almost like give them a sort of a fridge rating or an ESG rating for how their algorithms operate. And I think that this is the approaching things in this manner is much more likely to concentrate the minds of certainly the big tech platforms who are subject to the whims of asset managers, and it may also start to trickle in a trickle down sort of sense, start to concentrate the minds of investors in AI-driven technology startups. But as I want to sort of say, and want to sort of really be very realistic about this, employing AI at a very early stage tech startup level is unless company in question is, is particularly concerned about things like, environmental, social governance, or climate, or diversity, or whatever. Doesn't really enter into the conversation, because at this very, very early stage, these tech startups think only about growth, and that's the be all and end all.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that's definitely been like my experience of how ethics can sometimes be viewed more as like a hindrance to growth than something that actually can work within a startup or within a company, or it doesn't something that maybe VC investors would look to invest in, maybe an ethics startup or something like that. I think that's interesting that you'd say that maybe ESG is more like you're saying, the risk side is probably more where people actually want to pay attention or see it as an issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be slightly more upbeat, going forward, we now see the rise of impact funds. So these are all purpose-driven venture capital funds.
Yeah,
and these are funds who they're either explicitly signing up to the United Nations SDGs, the global goals, the 17 goals about access to clean air and things like that. They're more or less, they're either explicitly signing up to these things, or they are using them as a sort of a guide rails to inform their investing, or they're full blown set up as quote impact unquote investors. And the startups can actually find these kinds of funds now, and they will actually go after companies that really are putting thought into the ethics side of their businesses from top down, all the way from the code base all the way up to does everybody cycle into work kind of thing. So well when we cycle into work,
yeah.
or those kinds of, but you get my drift. So there, and of course there are high level reports available to people in the city and to VCs and to investors in VCs, otherwise known as LPs, limited partners. There are reports available to these people saying that the growth of the future is going to come from taking a much more ethically based approach, or impact-led approach, to high growth technology companies, and that's where, in fact, that's where much of the growth is going to come from. And there's going to be less and less growth in non-impact oriented businesses, because, as I sort of hinted at earlier, the greater hinterland of investors and the big asset management funds are gradually, in a sort of very sort of slow moving manner, starting to factor a lot of these things in, is the algorithm suddenly is the algorithm in your company favoring white people, or something extreme as that, or is the algorithm not taking into account CO2 production? I'm just talking in very basic terms here, but these are the kinds of things going on in the background, and it started a few years ago in a very sort of small way, and it's becoming much bigger as we move on. And of course, the lots of issues about how society operates, the disparities between rich and poor, etc., between races, genders, and of course the climate crisis become much bigger mainstream topics of interest.
And what do you think, is there, it sounds, I think, from what you're saying, like I think you see it as going to be sort of slow progress, I think, in that direction, where the growth and the sort of the ethical side is more important. Do you think there's a way to speed that up? Do you think it's like all that important to actually speed it up?
That's a good question. Can we speed it up? These high growth technology companies, largely, let's face it, unless you're living in somewhere like China or Russia, live in a pretty market oriented economies. capitalist economies, and they do what they do. The way that there is gradually more pressure from things like, for instance, EU legislation, which, the EU is a big legislative behemoth, which makes many pronouncements about, what it would like to see happen in markets. But of course, unless EU members institute those in laws, they tend to remain, nice to haves. But those EU laws, which are often largely suggestions by the EU for its member states, when everyone sort of starts to sing from the same song sheet, it's largely, not necessarily entirely because of the EU, or I'm sure everyone would like to think that, but also because of the way the market is kind of hinting. And if you look at like pronouncers like the big asset management fund BlackRock, I believe, at the beginning of last year, said that the environment was, job one and extremely top of mind for asset managers. Those sorts of statements have filtered into the way venture capital funds operate, or at least, even if their existing funds tweak the way they operate, if they're not set up from day one as impact oriented or purpose driven, or whatever you want to call it. And there is a sort of a parallel universe which kind of runs alongside, EU legislation or supranational national legislation, and then national legislation, and also the way that markets operate. So, I've been to Davos many times over the last 10 or so years, and people do like to talk about these things about, the fourth industrial revolution, and will AI, leave us all jobless, etc.
Yeah.
And it's if gradually, when you're sort of sipping your warm Chardonnay in Davos, surrounded by lots of white men, unfortunately, in suits, and they're all sort of nodding their heads sagely, talking about how yes, we really must think about the environment as they flying on their private jet. There is societal pressure on these people. Actually, they all have children, by the way. A lot of the new VC funds that have appeared in the last few years, which are impact oriented, are backed by family offices, and those family offices have millennial age people in their 30s or ish who are telling their wealthy parents, God damn it, do a fund that doesn't screw up the planet, for heaven's sake. And so that's that's all factoring in as well. So sort of both the kind of legislation side, both the asset management staff, both the sort of societal pressure. It is, it does gradually push us in the right direction with, fingers crossed. And of course, and ultimately, the bean counters at the end of the line who want to see whether or not you do your 10x, whether you save the planet or not, are starting to see the fact that taking this approach will create more successful companies. Was that?
Yeah.
So,
no.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
oh no, I was just going to ask about with all that in mind. Have you seen a massive shift in the way people are thinking since the pandemic within these asset management firms and the VC startups? And have you seen kind of a positive change, or what have you kind of seen off the back of the pandemic with that?
Sorry, can you run that by me again?
Yeah, no, sure. I was just saying, so have you seen a change in people's mindset within this environment since the pandemic, and how they view kind of the future of things in a more maybe ethical way, or like you were talking about the environment? Do you think has there been an accelerated push because of the pandemic, or have people kind of relatively stayed the same?
I think, well, let's be brutally honest. I mean, everyone had to work remotely, mean, from my perspective, the entire technology industry has gone remote. I haven't had a formal business meeting in person with anyone for over a year, which is really quite something, given that I used to burn CO2 quite a lot on planes, going to conferences, meeting hundreds of people, both in the UK and abroad, every week, and that's all disappeared overnight. And so, yeah, by necessity, everyone had to do that, and of course, that also had an environmental impact. But I think, they say, don't they, that if you do something for, was it 21 days or 66 days? I'm never
keep changing.
Never sure which one it is that we're supposed to be doing to get a habit. We've definitely been doing this for more than 66 days.
Yeah.
So this habit, the habits that have happened to us in this industry are now very much baked in. And they may not be baked in fully as in, in the way that many Western governments locked everyone down for months on end. But you can see it already that tech startups across Europe, for instance, which is generally my domain, they up sticks, got out of the city. Everybody went remote, hit the Slack platform, and they carried on. And oddly, some of them even became more efficient as a result, and didn't have to fly an entire team to Web Summit in Lisbon with 60,000 other people and hundreds of thousands of flights and CO2 pumping into the atmosphere. They could still fundraise without having to get a booth at a big trade show or whatever. They could fundraise over Zoom, and all of a sudden they could not just fly for one meeting to San Francisco and then find they didn't get the funding. They could do 10 meetings, or more in a few days, and get an investment ground with the only CO2 burnt being the servers pumping their HD Zoom video into the atmosphere. So that has been an absolutely radical change. If you think about it, it's very much like the Second World War. We've gone from a propeller-driven Spitfire to a jet-engined Meteor, and in the space of a year, and it's absolutely astounding. Now, are people going to come back? Well, it remains to be seen. But certainly, if they are going to come back, they won't need as big an office, because lots of people are going to be still working remote. So it's been a transformative period.
Yeah, definitely. I've really noticed it. So, like I said, I'm an academic. So, this year we had all these, remote conferences, and you're just sitting in your house, and they made this sort of video game setting for the poster presentations and stuff. But I've certainly missed traveling to the conferences and meeting people in person. But so I get the feeling that, I don't know, you sound a little skeptical sometimes in terms of the ethics, but you've talked about there being societal pressure for companies to do better in terms of ethics, and I'm wondering, actually, to what extent do you think that's actually true? I mean, I think Amazon is a company that is well known to have very questionable ethical principles. We've heard about Amazon employees dropping dead and things like that, and yet people are still, are they the biggest company right now? People are still very willing to support them. So do you think that the societal pressure is more of the idea of societal pressure of, a few vocal people on Twitter and the news, or do you think there's actually a significant impact that there can be for companies actually in terms of numbers? Because I think about Amazon or Facebook, and they still have millions, billions of customers or users.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about, right? So, lots of people, you don't really think particularly hard about AI ethics in terms of whether or not it's suggesting to you a different washing powder on your shopping trolley in your Tesco shopping shopping basket as you order your weekly shop to be delivered by, well, at the moment a human being, but probably eventually a robot. You don't think hugely about in fact, this does exist, a startup which claims it's using AI to mix dog food for particularly discerning pet owners.
Wow.
You don't think whether or not there's a higher mix of pork in there or not. Yeah, where AI has smacked people slap in the face in the UK mainly, it is when the algorithm went wrong for selecting how school children were going to be graded. And, we had a Minister of Education famously stand up in the UK Parliament and, blaming the algorithm. And it's a bit, there's a famous phrase in UK politics, when the railways don't work, you blame the leaves on the line.
Yeah. I love that.
The leaves, the leaves make the line too slippery and all of a sudden the trains can't run. Meanwhile, of course, nobody ever mentions the fact that the trains carry on running in, freezing cold Switzerland or somewhere. But so now, we're blaming the algorithm. And I think, now since that happened, people are starting to go, well, hold on a minute, what other aspects of algorithmic decision making is going on that's going to affect our lives? And it's a much subtler and more insidious thing that, the YouTube algorithm will, you'll start watching a perfectly innocent, program about, I don't know, World War I aeroplanes, and then sort of 10 videos later you're watching some sort of weird radicalization about I don't know. Strange conspiracy theory. And this is the problem, is that, and it goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning, was about how AI has been used by tech companies to promote growth. And it is really, Silicon Valley effectively invented a hypodermic needle called social media, and just wants you to carry on jabbing it into your arm. And more and more, faster, and because they want those eyeballs, they want that engagement, and they want to be able to tell advertising agencies they have millions of eyeballs on their video or whatever it is they're showing. And similarly, Amazon wants you to hover momentarily over that extra thing that you might just add to your shopping basket, that extra cable you need for that gadget, or that extra whatever it is. And that's exactly the same thing. So these are this is the way tech works. This is the way it's been built. It's built to increase our consumption habits across enormous numbers of vectors, whether it be media, e-commerce, you name it. And it is very much here to stay. But the question is, will people hesitate over how they're being nudged in some direction by an algorithm? Perhaps they will become more aware of how these things operate. The famously, when your shopping is delivered and there's bits missing from your shopping list, do people think that that's an algorithm? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. Perhaps they will sometimes. I mean, it's at the moment it's an annoyance, but when it comes down to the things like really crucial things like the education of your children and their actual card carrying life choices, that's a whole other ball game, isn't it?
Yeah, I tend to think that in a lot of the things that we might think are insignificant might actually end up being something big, right? Like, I don't think a lot of people thought about social media being as problematic as it has turned out to be when it was sort of starting up. But I think, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, because I think, we spoke about this before. We're not like in general, like you were saying about the algorithm that happened in the summer predicting people's A levels. I think it wasn't till then that a lot of people didn't really realize that this was kind of already, embedded in our like everyday life. And I think since the pandemic now all these tech companies have just got larger, and like you're saying, we're relying on Zoom, where everyone's remote. And quite frankly, people, I don't know if people are going to stop using Amazon because it's out of everything's out of a convenience, really, isn't it? A lot of these tools have given us extra convenience in a time that, imagine if the pandemic had happened 15 years ago, what would have companies been able to do? So it's kind of this, I guess it's this up balance. But I actually think we're coming up on our time now. I don't know if you had any like closing remarks you wanted to make about Mike, about the future in VC investment, what you see happening, or anything you'd like to share with us before we leave?
Well, I suppose the future of tech startups and VC is that, yes, the tech startups are really about data, and then getting as much data as possible, applying AI over that data to get that growth, to get that high valuation, to raise more money, to get bigger, to exit for $1 billion or more dollars, $100 billion, etc. That's not going away. That's here to stay. If there's a sort of an upbeat take on that, it's that other factors such as diversity in society, impact of the climate, are being factored in, not just because they're good things, but they are also risk profiles which you want to be aware of when you're building these companies, so that you don't get hit slap in the face later down the line when you've built the thing, you've set the clock running, built the machine to run, and you find that you've actually inbuilt a lot of problems that you will have to deal with down the track. But my final sort of take on the whole subject is that really our lives really are entirely influenced by AI algorithms now. It's almost like we live through various universes, multiverses, that we could take the AI that tells Google's algorithm to go down that street as opposed to another street, when you put it in your sat nav or your Google Maps as you're driving or walking or cycling, you took that left turn and then you got hit by the car when you could have taken the right turn, but you chose Google's suggestion, not your own ideas. When you swipe on your dating apps, did you what's your future life partner turns out to be suggested entirely by an AI. These things are full of our lives now, and there's no getting away from it. And I think the only way to deal with it really is to just become more and more aware of them, frankly.
No, you're right.
I think that's a great takeaway message. Is what I always tell people. I think also because a lot of people think about the Terminator and sort of that sort of thing, but not these more insidious ways that AI is shaping our lives. So thank you so much, Mike. That was really interesting. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for tuning in, guys. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And as always, you can follow us on social media. We're at Let's Chat Ethics on Twitter, and we're let's.chat.ethics on Instagram. And we are Let's Chat Ethics on YouTube. And also we have the website, which is www.letschatethics.co.uk. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.